Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. I'm so glad you stopped by today. I know I'm not in my normal filming space, but it's currently raining and it's really dark in the bedroom and I didn't want to deal with moving all my lights to the bedroom, so I just figured I'd make it easy on myself and film out here. For today's project, I really wanted to do something that would look like a creature that a fairy would have as a pet. So I figured insects are probably like the closest thing in size, since fairies are kind of tiny, to be a pet for them. So I'm going to be making a fairy bug. Anyways, let's get started. Okay guys, so the first thing that I'm going to do to make our piece is I'm going to start on the clay head. Now this is actually going to be the only clay piece that I have for this particular art doll. I'm actually going to be making the legs out of Instamorph and wire. So I don't think this will be a super small piece, but I do want to go kind of on the smaller side so it kind of has that fairy feel. I'm starting with a lump of tin foil. I have it just kind of roughly shaped into something kind of round, a little bit pointed on the tip, and then I'm going to completely cover this in clay and blend it together to get a basic shape to start with. Now, as I was working with this piece, I just had a rough idea of what I wanted. I really didn't know how I wanted the head completely, so it was just kind of fun messing around and seeing how it worked out and seeing if I liked it, and if not, I would just change it as I went. Now, to go along with the kind of buggy theme, I am going to be using some Rezoned Eyes. These are just simple little domes that are filled with glitter, and there isn't really any coloring or anything, it's just glitter and resin. And I'm just going to take these pieces and push them onto my clay head where I want them positioned. So I got those positioned. Now, because this is going to be a bug, I'm not going to give it any eyelids or anything. So most likely after this is done, these will probably pop off because there's nothing really holding them on. So I'll end up gluing them back on if they do. Honestly, I'll probably pop them off after everything's baked just to make sure that they're held on correctly by gluing them in. Now, for some reason, I thought it'd be fun to give our little bug friend some teeth. Some kind of pointed, almost dragon-like teeth. So I just made some little cones and I laid them out on the face and just kind of figured out where I want them. And then for the mouth itself, I'm just going to take a strip of clay and we're just going to make the upper lip. So I laid that out on the face and then I blended it in. Now, one thing I did know that I wanted to give our little bug friend was some antennae, so I'm going to make a spot for those to go when we add them. So I'm just going to take some balls of clay and I'm going to position them right in front of the eyes. The position that I chose was kind of based off of a dragonfly because they have tiny little ones right around there, or even a fly. I think theirs are similar positioned as well. So I'm just putting some balls of clay right there, and then I'm using my tool to push a hole right in the middle of each one. That way we have a spot to glue in our antennae when we're ready. While figuring out what I wanted to use to decorate the face, I found a few extra claws that I made back when we did the ghost dragon. I made these for that and I had a bunch of extra ones, and I kept them around because I figured they'd make cute little horns, and they actually match the eyes that I'm using for this piece. So I'm just going to use roughly about 3 of them for this creature, just kind of placing them on the top of the head in kind of a straight line. I'm going to use my tools and kind of clean up around the resin and also try and blend it into the clay. That way these won't have to be popped off and re-glued like the eyes. And then after that, I just added some very simple nostril holes, and then I started adding a texture to the face. Most of this I just did with a dotting tool. Once I was happy with how it looked, I'm going to put this in the oven at 275 Fahrenheit for probably about 30-35 minutes. It's not that big of a head, so it shouldn't take that long. Now, you're probably expecting me at this point to say that we're going to start painting the face. Well, this is one of those extremely rare times where we're going to do that almost last. So we're going to start on actually sewing everything and getting the other parts of the creature ready first. So this is going to be the pattern that we're going to use to make our fairy creature's body. So I really didn't want it to look like any specific insect, so I kind of went in between like 3 different ones. I aimed for something that looked like a dragonfly, wasp, and kind of mosquito, but not really. So the pattern pieces consist of a side piece, a top piece, some wings that we're going to use, and then our legs. Now if you want, you can make all of your legs the same size, but for some reason I decided to make them all different. So because these are going to be a little bit easy, I figured I'd get these out of the way first, so we're going to be doing the wings. I figured giving it an extra set of wings would make it look a little bit more fantasy-like. So 2 of the pair of wings are going to be made out of silver felt. I figured the front ones and the back ones, and then the middle are going to be done differently. So for this, I have my pattern, I traced it out on our felt pieces, and then I cut a set of those out, and we're going to be gluing them on top of our other felt pieces. So I didn't cut out the second pair, that way I had a little bit more wiggle room for when we cut everything out completely. So I'm just gluing the 2 layers together with my Fabri-Tac, and we're going to let those dry. And then the middle wings are going to be made out of a more stiffer felt, and I'm going to add sequins to them. So for this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to cover the edges of my felt with my Fabri-Tac, and then I'm going to lay it on my sequin fabric. So I'm going to press one side onto my sequins fabric. I'm going to make sure to do both wings at once, that way it's just easier. And then I'm going to take another piece of our sequins and I'm going to glue it onto the other side. We're going to let all of this dry and then we can cut everything out at once. Once we have all of our wings cut out, we can start gluing them together and adding them to a wire frame. So I'm going to have the wings overlapping, so this will give us a perfect place to hide our wires inside. I made a very simple wire frame to connect our wings together, and I'm just going to be gluing this in place as I'm gluing the silver wings in place on top of the sequin ones. So I'm going to get our wings in place on our wire frame and let that dry, and then once it was done, I decided that I wanted to take a little bit of my 3D fabric paint and decorate the sides of the wings. So I just kind of made a very simple pattern, laid it out, and then I have to set this aside to dry, and then we can use these when we have everything else ready. So our wings are done, and now we're going to move on to the sewing for the body. Okay, so for sewing the body, we have 3 main pieces that we need to put together. We have a left and a right, and we have the middle. So each one consists of a front and a back. I decided that I wanted the abdomen to be gold, so I'm using my fake leather for that. And then the thorax and neck portion is going to be a kind of more pink color. So first thing that we need to do is we need to sew all of these together. So we need to attach our pink pieces to our gold pieces. And then once we have those connected, we're going to start sewing our abdomen together. So I'm going to take our middle piece and we're going to sew the 2 side pieces of the abdomen onto that. And then after that, we can close off our abdomen by sewing the under portion, and then we can flip it right side out and stuff it. Now we can't really do any more sewing to the body portion until we get it onto the wire frame. So this is actually a very simple wire frame, it just looks a little bit more complicated because it has extra legs. So it looks a little bit more intimidating, but it really honestly isn't. It's put together the same way I put most of my wire frames together. So I'm just going to take our fabric piece for our body, I'm going to cut some holes for all 6 of the legs, and I'm going to slide this over our wire frame. After that, our wings should be dry, and we're going to take the wire frame that those are on and we're going to add those to the wire frame of the body. So we're just going to place that on top and start wrapping it together using a 20 gauge wire. Now once I had the wings on the wire frame, I realized that the fabric body is coming up a little bit short to connect it to the wings. So I'm going to improvise and just take some white fur fabric and sew that into place to extend our fabric body. That way we can reach the wings and glue the wings onto the body. So I'm going to do this to the top. I just made like a V shape and I'm going to sew this into place, and then I did the same thing to the sides of the body. I just made some strips and I sewed those into place as well. And then once we had the fur fabric on, it was long enough to reach the wings, so I glued the fabric around the bases of the wings. I let that dry for a little bit so I didn't have to worry about bumping anything, and then I took the clay head that we made and I glued it to the wire for the neck. I then took the fabric for the neck and started gluing it around the base of the head. Now the fabric for the neck, I really didn't judge how wide I wanted it because I didn't know at the time how large I wanted the head. So what I'm going to do now that we have everything in place is I'm going to figure out how large of a piece of fabric I need to continue closing up the head, and I'm going to make a triangle to fit that. I'm going to sew that onto the fur piece of fabric that we have on the back, and then I'm going to glue it into place on the top of the head and let that dry. Once that's dried, we can stuff the rest of the body through the sides and then sew up both sides of the neck. Now I'm going to start working on the legs. So the main body of the legs is still going to be fabric, so I have those patterns all drawn out, and I'm going to be using white fabric for this. Now mine are going to be slightly different. The front legs are different than the middle legs, and then the middle legs are different from the back legs, and they're just all different sizes for some reason. I guess I wanted to be more complicated. But if you didn't want to do that, you can make all of the legs the same pattern, so you wouldn't have to worry about making all the different types of legs. So each leg is going to have a left and a right, and we're going to take those and pin them together and use our sewing machine to sew the fronts of them. So we're going to sew all of our legs together, and then once we have those in place, I'm going to start sewing them onto the body. So basically, I'm going to take the top portion of our fabric for our leg, and we're going to start sewing it around each wire. Now, because all of my pairs of legs are different sizes, I did have to mark them to make sure that I sewed them in the correct spot. So if you're going to do the same thing, just make sure you have them marked so you don't accidentally sew them in the wrong spot. Okay, so our fabric legs are all in place, and now we need to figure out the ends of them. So these are going to be made out of Instamorph, and the Instamorph itself is already white, so once they've hardened, I'm not going to paint them or anything. So I have the wires for all of the legs adjusted so they're the right size that we need, and then the ends are looped so we have something to build our Instamorph on top of. So I'm going to melt down some Instamorph, and we're going to start adding them to the wires for the legs. So I'm just going to kind of mush my Instamorph onto the end of the wire that has the loop, and then just kind of shape it until I like the shape of it. For the very end, I decided to take my scissors and cut the Instamorph while it was still soft and make 2 separate toes. So I'm going to make feet for all of my wire legs. I'm going to make sure they're completely hardened before we move on. Once they're hardened, we can then take the fabric for the legs and start gluing them around the bases of the feet. Now the fabric doesn't reach all the way around the Instamorph, which is perfectly fine. What we're going to do is we're going to finish closing up our legs and stuffing them and getting that done. And then I'm going to take a little bit more of my white fur fabric, and I'm just going to glue that around the bottom. And then for the front, I decided to decorate it using my 3D fabric paints. So I'm just going to use some gold and go over the front, and then we're going to have to let that dry. Once our body is completely dried and put together, we can then start painting our face. The first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to primer it. So I'm going to do my best, and I'm going to try and match the color of the pink fabric, and we're going to paint the entire face with it. I'm going to let that dry real quick, and then I'm going to start adding some white highlights kind of around the front of the face, and then we might also add some shadows here and there around the eyes. And then for markings on the face, I just decided to use white. I added a few lines on the sides of the face, and then I decided to use my dotting tool to add dots to the top of the head. So I did that, I messed around a little bit more with the shading, and then I just let everything dry. After it was completely dry, I mixed up some resin and I painted over the entire face, and I tried to do my best to blend it into the fabric body. That way we didn't have any drips or any weird seams. Now the head had to dry overnight, so the next day I decided to make my little antennae. So for this, I'm just going to be using fishing line, and I'm going to cut pieces to the length that I want them. Now what I'm going to do so that they're easier to work with is I'm going to glue them to a piece of cardboard, and then I'm going to take my 3D fabric paints and I'm going to add some dots to the very ends of them. I'm going to let that dry completely, and then I'm going to glue these into place on the head. Okay guys, and this is my little fairy bug. I had so much fun making it. It was just something fun and relaxing to do, and I didn't really take myself too seriously with it. Anyways, our little bug is going to be in my Etsy shop, so if anyone is interested in buying them, you can check the links down below for that, along with a bunch of other creatures that I still have up for sale. Thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure to like, subscribe, do all that fun stuff, and I'll see you guys next time.